Secret 7 by Enid Blyton. "We'd better have a meeting of the Secret 7, said Peter to Janet. "We haven't had one for ages, and it's no good having a secret society unless we use it. We'd better send out messages to the others." "Oh, 5 notes to write," groaned Janet. "You're quicker at writing than I am, Peter. You write 3, and I'll write 2. Who's the 7th of us? I've forgotten." "George, of course," said Janet. "Pam, Colin, Jack, Barbara, George, you and me. That's the 7. The Secret 7. It sounds nice, doesn't it?" "There you are," said Peter, passing his sheet of paper to Janet. "You can copy that." Janet read what Peter had written. "Important. A meeting of the Secret 7 will be held tomorrow morning in the shed at the bottom of our garden at 10 o'clock. Please give password." "Oh, I say, what was the last password we had?" said Janet in alarm. "It's so long since we had a meeting that I've forgotten." "Well, it's a good thing for you that you've got me to remind you," said Peter. "Our latest password is Wenceslasless, because we wanted a Christmassy one. Fancy you forgetting that." Peter finished first. He let Scamper lick the envelopes. He was good at that. He had such a nice, big, wet tongue. "Now shall we go and deliver the secret messages?" said Janet. "Mummy said we could go out. It's a nice sunny morning." said Scamper, running to the door when he heard the word out. He pawed at the door impatiently. Later that afternoon, the 2 children and Scamper went down to the old shed. It was warm, because the boiler was going well nearby to heat the big greenhouse. Peter looked around. "It feels quite cosy. Let's arrange boxes for seats and get the old garden cushions out. And we'll ask Mummy if we can have some lemonade or something, and biscuits. We'll have a really proper meeting." So, with 5 boxes and the 2 flower pots, there were seats for everyone. The bell rang for tea. "Well, we've just finished nicely," said Peter. The next morning, 5 children made their way to Old Mill House, where Peter and Janet lived. George came first and knocked on the door. There was a silence. He knocked again. "Give the password, silly," said Peter's voice. "Oh, I forgot," said George. "Wenceslasless." The door opened at once. George grinned and went in. He looked round. "I say, this is jolly cosy." "Yes, it's nice and warm here," said Peter. "Where's your badge? Your button with SS on it?" "Oh, blow. I forgot it," said George. "I hope I haven't lost it." There was another knock at the door. It was Pam and Barbara. There was silence in the shed. Everyone was listening for the password. "Wenceslasless," hissed Barbara, in such a peculiar voice that everyone jumped. "Wenceslasless," whispered Pam. The door opened, and in they went. "Good. You're both wearing your badges," said Peter, pleased. "Now, where are Colin and Jack? They're late." They arrived a minute later, and after giving the password, were let into the shed. Peter looked round at the little company. "We'll have our meeting first, and then we'll have the eats and drinks," he said. "First of all," he went on, "we must arrange a new password." "I thought of one last night," said Jack. "Would, weekdays do?" "What's the sense of that?" asked Peter. "Well, there are 7 days in a week, aren't there? And we're the 7 Society," said Jack. "I thought it was rather good." "Oh, I see. Yes, it is rather good," said Peter. "Though actually, there are only 6 weekdays. Hands up those who think it's good." Everybody's hand went up. Yes, weekdays was a good idea for a password for the 7. Jack looked pleased. "Now, what about some grub?" said Peter. "We have a little more business to discuss," said Peter when they'd finished, giving Scamper a few crumbs to lick. "It's no good having a society unless we have some plan to follow, or something to do. Has anyone any ideas?" "Can't we solve a mystery, or something like that?" suggested George. "Well, what kind of mystery do you mean?" asked Barbara, puzzled. "I don't really know," said George. "We'd have to be on the lookout for one. You know, watch for something strange or peculiar or queer and solve it." "It sounds exciting," said Colin. "Oh, well," said Peter, "we'll just have to keep our eyes open and wait and see. If anyone hears of any good deeds we can do, or of any mystery that wants solving, they must at once call a meeting of the Secret Seven. Is that understood?" Everyone said yes. "And if we have anything to report, we can come here to this Secret Seven shed and leave a note, can't we?" said George. "That would be the best thing to do," agreed Peter. "Janet and I will be here each morning, and we'll look to see if any of you have left a note. I hope somebody does." "Let's go and build snowmen in the field opposite the old house down by the stream," said George, getting up. "The snow's thick there." And off they all went to the field by the stream to build an army of snowmen. They didn't build an army, of course. They only had time to build 4 snowmen. They left them in the field and went out to the nearby gate. Opposite was an old house. It was empty except for one room at the bottom, where dirty curtains hung across the window. "Who lives there?" asked Pam. "Only a caretaker," said Janet. "He's very old and very deaf, and awfully bad-tempered." They hung over the gate and looked at the desolate old house. "Isn't the path up to the house lovely and smooth with snow?" said Janet. "Not even the caretaker has trodden on it. I suppose he uses the back gate." "Oh, Scamper, you naughty dog, come back!" Scamper had squeezed under the gate and gone bounding up the smooth, snowy path. The curtains at the ground floor window moved, and a cross, wrinkled old face looked out. Then the window was flung open. "You get out of here! Take your dog away! Or you won't have children or dogs here, pestering little varmints!" Then a door opened at the side of the house, and the old man appeared with a big stick. "I'll whack your dog till he's black and blue!" shouted the man. Peter pushed open the gate and tore up the path to Scamper, afraid he'd be hurt. I'll take him, he shouted to the old man. The caretaker shouted, "Don't you come back here again, that's all! I sent a policeman after you!" He disappeared into the side door again. Peter marched Scamper down the drive and out of the gate. Janet shut the gate. "Oh, goodness, there's the church clock striking 1:15. We'll really have to hurry." "We'll let you all know when the next meeting is," shouted Peter as they parted at the corner. "And don't forget the password and your badges." They all went home. Jack was the first in because he lived very close. "I'd better put my badge away," he thought, and put up his hand to feel for it. But it wasn't there. He couldn't find it anywhere. Oh, he must have dropped it in the field when he was making the snowmen with the others. Bother, blow. "I seem to remember something falling off me when I was making that last snowman," thought Jack. "I think I'll go out and look this afternoon. I'd better go before it snows again, or I'll never find it." But Miss Ely, his sister's governess, who was in charge while his mother was away, caught him as he was going out and stopped him. "No, Jack, you're to stay in." "Oh, but I want to go and find something I've lost, Miss Ely," argued Jack, trying to edge out. "Did you hear what I said?" said Miss Ely, raising her voice, and poor Jack slid indoors again. All right, he would jolly well go out that night then, and look with his torch. Miss Ely would not stop him from doing what he wanted to do. He went up to bed at his usual time, after saying a polite good night to Miss Ely, but he didn't get undressed. He put on his coat and cap instead, and when he heard her go to bed, crept downstairs quietly and went to the garden door. He undid it gently. The bolt gave a little squeak, but that was all. He stepped into the garden. He made his way to the lane and went down it to the field, flashing his little torch as he went. He soon came to the field where they'd built the snowmen, and he climbed over the gate. He switched on his torch and the snowmen gleamed whiter than ever. The one they'd given eyes, a nose and mouth, with a cap and coat, seemed to look at him gravely as he hunted here and there. Jack turned his back on him. Then suddenly he gave an exclamation. He'd found his badge. There lay the button in the snow, with SS embroidered on it, for Secret 7. Hooray! He picked it up. It was wet with snow, and he pinned it carefully on his coat. His torch suddenly flickered, and then went out. "Oh, blow," said Jack. "The battery's gone. It might have lasted till I got home, really it might. Well, it's a good thing I know my way." He suddenly heard a noise down the lane, and saw the headlights of a car. He went to the gate. The car came slowly by, and then Jack saw that it was towing something. Something rather big. What could it possibly be? The boy strained his eyes to see. It wasn't big enough for a removal van, and yet it looked rather like the shape of one. It wasn't a caravan either, because there were no wide windows at the side. Were there any windows at all? Jack couldn't see any. Well, whatever was this curious van? And where was it going? The driver simply must have made a mistake. The boy began to climb over the gate. Then he suddenly sat still. The car's headlights had gone out. Somebody spoke to somebody else in a low voice. "Nobody about, is there?" "It's only that deaf fella," said another voice. "We'll have a look-see, will you?" said the first voice, "just in case." Jack slipped quickly down from the gate as he saw a powerful torch flash out. He crouched behind the snowy hedge, scraping snow over himself. The flashlight shone over the gate, and the man gave an exclamation. "Who's there? Who are you?" Jack's heart beat so hard against him that it hurt. "My word. Hey, look here, Nibs. A whole lot of snowmen standing out here. I thought they were alive at first, watching for us. I got a scare, all right." Another man came softly to the first, and he laughed too. "Ha! Kids' work, I suppose," he said. "Yeah, they look real all right in this light. Nah, there's nobody about here at this time of night. Come on, Mac. Let's get down to business." They went back to the car. Jack sat up, trembling. He crept to the gate again. He heard queer sounds from where the men were, as if they were unbolting something. Opening the van, perhaps. And then there came a sound that sent Jack helter-skelter over the gate and up the lane as fast as his legs would take him. An angry, snorting sound, and then a curious high squeal, and then a noise of a terrific struggle, with the two men panting and grunting ferociously. He came to his house, panting painfully. He crept in at the garden door and locked and bolted it. He went upstairs, not even caring if the stairs creaked under his feet. He switched on the light in his bedroom. That was better. He didn't feel so scared once he had the light on. "Oh, I went out to find my badge, and goodness knows what else I found," thought the boy. "Golly, I must tell the others. We must have a meeting tomorrow. This is something for the Secret 7. Next morning, Janet went down to the shed by herself. Peter was brushing Scamper. "Just open the shed and give it an airing," ordered Peter. The shed smelt rather stuffy. She left the door open and went to open the little window too. When she turned round, she saw Jack's note on the floor. On the outside it said, "Urgent, very important indeed." She was astonished. She opened the paper out and glanced down it. Her mouth fell open in amazement. She raced out of the shed at top speed, yelling for Peter. "What is it?" asked Peter, surprised. "Look, I found this paper when I went to the shed this morning," said Janet, and she gave him Jack's note. "It's marked urgent, very important indeed. Look what it says inside." Peter read out loud what Jack had written. "Peter, call a meeting of the Secret 7 at once. Very important mystery to solve. It happened to me last night about 9:30. Get the others together at 10 if you can. I'll be there. Jack." Peter said. "I'll go and tell Colin and George. You can tell the girls." Janet sped off in one direction and Peter in another. Everyone turned up early, eager to hear the news. Everyone remembered the password, too. "We got your note and warned all the members to attend this meeting," said Peter. "What's up, Jack? Is it really important?" "Well, you listen and see," said Jack. And he sat down on the box left empty for him and told his story. "Well," said Jack at last, "it certainly is something for the Secret Seven to look into. There's no doubt about that. It's all very mysterious indeed." "How are we going to tackle it?" said George. They all sat and thought. "We'd better find out if we can tell anything by the tracks in the snow," said Peter. "We'll find out, too, if there are car tracks up the drive to that old house." "Yes, and we could ask the old caretaker if he heard anything last night," said Colin. "And we might try and find out who owns the old empty house." "Yes," said Peter. "Pam, you go with George and see if you can find out who owns the house. Janet, you and Barbara can go down the lane and examine it for car tracks and anything else you can think of. And I and Colin and Jack will go into the drive of the old house and see if we can get the caretaker to tell us anything." Peter finished, feeling rather important as he'd made all these arrangements. "Meet and report here this afternoon. You've discovered a most exciting mystery, Jack, and it's up to the Secret Seven to solve it as soon as they can." When the music stops, please turn your cassette over. All the Secret Seven set off at once, feeling extremely important. Scamper went with Peter, Colin and Jack. They left Pam and George at the corner, looking rather worried. The two looked at one another. "How are we going to find out who owns the house?" said Pam. "Ask at the post office," said George, feeling that he really had got a very bright idea. "Good idea," said Pam, and they went off to the post office. They were lucky enough to see a postman emptying the letters from the pillar box outside. George nudged Pam. "Come on, we must start somewhere. We'll ask him." They went up to the man. Excuse me," said George. "Could you tell us who lives at the old house down by the stream? You know, the empty house there." "How can anyone live in an empty house?" said the postman. "Don't ask silly questions and waste my time. You children, you think you're so funny, don't you?" "Oh, we didn't mean to be funny, or cheeky either," said Pam in a hurry. "What George means is, who owns the house? There's a caretaker there, we know. We just wondered who the house belongs to." "Why, you thinking of buying it?" said the postman, and laughed at his own joke. "How would I know who owns the place? I never take letters there except to old Dan, the caretaker. He only gets one once in a month. His wages, maybe. Better ask at the estate office over there." "Oh, thank you," said Pam joyfully, and the two of them hurried across to the estate office. They peeped in at the door. A boy of about 16 sat at a table there, addressing some envelopes. He didn't look very frightening. Perhaps he would know, and wouldn't ask them why they wanted the name of the owner. They went boldly in. The boy looked up. "What do you want?" he said. "We've been told to ask who owns the house down by the stream," said George, hoping the boy might think that some grown-up had sent him to find out. Actually, it was only Peter, of course, but he didn't see why he should say so. "I don't think the house is on the market," said the boy, turning over the pages of a big book. "Do your parents want to buy it or something? I didn't know it was to be sold." The two children said nothing because they didn't really know what to say. The boy went on, turning over the pages. "Ah, here we are," he said. "No, it's not for sale. It was sold to a Mr. J. Hollycoff some time ago. Don't know why he doesn't live in it, I'm sure." "Does Mr. Hollycoff live anywhere near here?" asked Pam. "No, his address is 64 Haycombe Street, Covelty," said the boy, reading it out. "Of course, I don't know if he lives there now. Do your people want to get in touch with him? I can find out if this is his address now, if you like. He's on the telephone at this address." "Oh, no, thank you," said George hastily. "We don't want to know anything more, as the house is, not for sale. Thank you very much. Good morning." They went out, rather red in the face, but very pleased with themselves. "Mr. Hollycoff," said Pam to George. "It's a peculiar name, isn't it? Do you remember his address, George?" "Yes," said George. He took out his notebook and wrote in it, "Mr. J. Hollycoff, 64 Haycombe Street, Covelty." "Well, we've done our part of the job. I wonder how the others are getting on." They were getting on quite well. Janet and Barbara were busy examining the tracks down the lane that led to the stream. They felt quite like detectives. "See, the car with the van behind, or whatever it was, turned into the lane from the direction of Templeton. It didn't come from our village," said Janet. "You can see quite clearly where the wheels almost went into the ditch." "Yes," said Barbara, staring at them. "The tracks of the van wheels are narrower than the wheels of the car that towed it, Janet. Oh, and look, just here in the snow you can see exactly what the pattern was on the wheels of the van. Not the car, though. They're all blurred." "Don't you think it would be a good idea to take a note of the pattern of the tyre?" said Janet. "I mean, it might just come in useful, and we could measure the width of the tyre print, too." "I don't see how those things can possibly matter," said Barbara, who wanted to go down the lane and join the three boys. "Well, I'm going to try and copy the pattern," said Janet firmly. "I'd like to have something to show the boys." So, very carefully, she drew the pattern in her notebook. Barbara laughed when she saw it. "Gracious, what a mess," she said. Janet looked cross and shut her notebook up. "Let's follow the tracks down the lane now," she said. "We'll see exactly where they go. Not many vans come down here. We ought to be able to follow the tracks easily." She was quite right. It was very easy to follow them. They went on and on down the lane, and then stopped outside the old house. "Look, the tyre marks leave all this mess, and then go on down the lane." She looked over the gate longingly. Were the boys in the old house with the caretaker? "Let's go and see if we can find the boys," said Barbara. "No, we haven't quite finished our job yet," said Janet. "We ought to follow the tracks as far as they go. Come on, we'll see if they go as far as the stream. There are 2 lots of tracks all down the lane as we saw, so it's clear that the car and trailer went down and then up again. We'll find out where they turned." That was easy. The tracks went down to a field gate, almost to the stream. Someone had opened the gate, and the car had gone in with the trailer, had made a circle there, come out of the gate again, and returned up the lane. It was all clearly written in the tyre tracks. "Now let's go back to the old house and wait for the boys," said Janet. "It's almost 1 o'clock, said Barbara. "Do you think they're still there?" They hung over the gate and watched and listened. To their horror, the old caretaker came rushing out as soon as he saw them, his big stick in his hand. "More of you! You wait till I get you! You'll feel my stick all right! Pestering, interfering children! You just wait!" But Barbara and Janet didn't wait. They fled up the lane in fright, as fast as they could possibly go in the soft, thick snow. The 3 boys and Scamper had had an exciting time. They'd gone down the lane, noting the car tracks as they passed. They came to the old house. They saw that the gate was shut. They leaned over the top and saw tracks going up the drive. there are my footprints that I made yesterday morning, said Peter, pointing to them. And look, you can see Scamper's paw marks here and there too. But our tracks are all overlaid with others. Bigger footmarks and other marks too. Look, rather odd. A bit like prints that would be made by someone wearing great, flat, roundish slippers, said Jack, puzzled. The boys leaned over the gate and considered all the marks carefully. They traced them with their eyes as far as they could see. "Can any of you make out if the tracks go up to the front steps?" said Colin. "I can't from here, but it rather looks to me as if the snow is smooth up to the steps, not trampled at all." "I can't make out from here," said Peter. "Let's go up the drive. After all, we've got to interview the caretaker and find out if he heard anything last night, so we've got to go in." Scamper ran ahead down the drive. He disappeared round a corner. The boys followed the footprints carefully, noting how the slipper-like ones appeared everywhere, as if the owner had gone from side to side and hopped about like mad. "They don't go up to the front doorsteps," said Colin. "I thought they didn't. They go round the side of the house. Look, here, right past the side door where the caretaker came out yesterday, and down this path and round to the kitchen door." "Well, how odd," said Peter, puzzled. "Why did everyone go prancing round to the kitchen door when there's a front door and a side door? Yes, all three tracks are here, 2 sets of shoe prints, and those funny round slipper prints too. Well, it beats me." They tried the kitchen door, but it was locked. They peered in at the window. The old fellow was shuffling into the empty kitchen. He saw the 3 boys through the window and went to fling it open in a rage. "If you want that there dog of yours, he's round in the front garden," he shouted. "You clear out. I won't have kids round here." "Aren't you rather lonely here?" shouted Colin. "Aren't you afraid of burglars?" "No, I'm not afraid," said the old fellow scornfully. "I got my big stick, and there's nothing to steal here." "Somebody's been round to the back door all the same," shouted Peter, seeing a chance to discuss this bit of mystery with the caretaker and see if he knew anything about it. He pointed to all the tracks leading to the back door. The old man leaned out of the window and looked at them. "There's no more than the tracks you made yourself, tramping about where you've no business to be," he said angrily. "They're not. I bet it was burglars or something else last night," said Peter, and all 3 boys looked closely at the caretaker to see if his face changed in any way. "Ah," he said, "you trying to frighten me, are you, with your silly boys' nonsense?" "No, I'm not," said Peter. "Didn't you hear anything at all last night? If burglars were trying to get in, wouldn't you hear them?" "I'm deaf," said the old man. "I wouldn't hear nothing at all." "Oh, but, wait now. I did think I heard something last night. I'd forgotten it. Huh, that's queer, that is." The boys almost forgot to breathe in their excitement. "What did you hear?" said Jack, forgetting to shout. The old man took no notice. He frowned, and his wrinkled face became even more wrinkled. "Seems like I heard some squealing or some such noise," he said slowly. "And I thought it was maybe some noises in my ears. I get noises often, you know, and I didn't go to see if anything was up. But there now, nobody took nothing nor did any damage, so what's the use of bothering, eh? If people want to squeal, let 'em, I say." "Was the squealing in the house?" shouted Peter. "Well, I guess I wouldn't hear any squealing outside," said the old man. "I'm as deaf as a post usually." "Ah, you're just making fun of me, you are, trying to frighten an old man. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves." Just at that moment, Scamper came bounding up. He saw the old caretaker at the window and leapt up at him in a friendly manner. The man jumped in alarm. He thought Scamper was trying to snap at him. He leaned forward and aimed a blow at him through the window with his stick. Scamper dodged and barked. "I'm going to teach that dog a lesson," cried the old man in a fury. He disappeared. "He's going to dart out of the side door," said Peter. "Come on, We've learnt all we want to know. We'll go." The meeting that afternoon was very interesting and full of excitement. Everyone had something to report. They came punctually to the old shed, giving the password without a pause. "Pam and George, your report first," said Peter. So they reported, telling how they'd found out that the old house had been sold to a Mr. J. Hollycoff some time back, although he'd never lived in it. "Did you get his address?" asked Peter. "It might be important." "Yes," said George, and produced his notebook. He read the address. Then the two girls reported. They told how they discovered that the tracks came from the direction of the town of Templeton, and had gone down to the gates of the old house, where it was plain that they'd stopped, as Jack had noticed the night before when he heard the car. Then they told how the tracks had gone into the field, circled round, and come out again, and had clearly gone up the lane and back the way they came. "Good work," said Peter. Janet took out her notebook and went rather red in the face. I've just got this to report too," she said, showing the page of notebook on which she'd tried to draw the tire pattern. Everyone looked at the scribbled pattern. It didn't look anything much, but Peter seemed pleased. "Even if it's no use, it was a good idea to do it," he said. Janet glowed with pride. She put away her notebook. "Now, you three boys report," she said. Peter made the report for the three of them. Everyone listened in silence, looking very thrilled. "So you see," finished Peter, "somebody went to the old house last night and got in through the kitchen door, because the footsteps went right to there. And I think they left a prisoner behind." Everyone looked upset and uncomfortable. "I don't like it," said Colin. Nobody liked it. It was horrid to think of a poor, squealing prisoner locked up somewhere in that old, empty house. "I've just thought of something," said Jack. "That van. Could it have been some sort of an ambulance, do you think? I mean, maybe it was, and the car took the wrong turning and stopped when it found it had gone wrong, and the ill person cried out with pain or something." "But the caretaker said he heard squealing, too, inside the house," said Peter. "We've got to do something," said George. "But what?" "We'll think," said Peter. So they all thought again. What would be the best move to make next? "I've thought of something," said Jack at last. "It's a bit frightening, though." "Whatever is it?" said all three girls at once. "Well, it seems to me that if there is a prisoner locked up in one of the rooms of the old house, he will have to be fed and given water," said Jack. "And whoever does that would have to visit him at night. See? So what about us taking it in turns at night to go and watch outside the old house to see who goes in? Then we might even follow them and see where they go and who they've got there." "It seems a very good idea," said Peter. "But we'd have to watch two at a time. I wouldn't want to go and hide there all by myself." "I think that probably someone will be along tonight," said George. "Why shouldn't all four of us boys go and wait in hiding?" "It would be difficult for four of us to hide and not be seen," said Colin. "Well, let's drape ourselves in white sheets or something and go and join the snowman in the field," said Peter jokingly. To his surprise, the other three boys pounced on his idea eagerly. "Oh, yes, Peter, that's fine. Nobody would ever guess we weren't snowmen if we had something white round us," said Colin. "We get a good view of the lane, and we could see and hear anyone coming along," said George. "Two could follow anyone into the house, and two remain on guard outside as snowmen." They all began to feel very excited. "What time shall we go?" said Colin. "Well, it was about 9:30, wasn't it, when the men arrived last night?" said Jack. "We'll make it the same time, then. Meet here at about 9 tonight. My goodness, this is a bit of excitement, isn't it?" Janet spent the whole of the afternoon making Scamper a white coat. Peter borrowed a ragged old sheet and found an old white mackintosh. He thought he could cut up the sheet and make it do for the 3 others. It was so big. Janet helped him cut it up and make armholes and neckholes. She giggled when he put it on to see if it was all right. "You do look peculiar," she said. "What about your head? How are you going to hide your dark hair? It'll be moonlight tonight, you know." "Well, you'll have to try and make white caps for us or something," said Peter. "And we'll paint our faces white." "There's some whitewash in the shed," said Janet with another giggle. "Oh dear, you will all look odd. Can I come to the shed at 9, Peter, and just see you all before you go?" "All right, if you can creep down without anyone seeing you," said Peter. At 8:30, the children's lights were out and didn't go on again. But torches lighted up their rooms, and Janet was very, very busy dressing up Scamper in his new white coat. He didn't like it at all, and kept biting at it. "Come on if you're coming, it's almost 9, said a whispering voice. It was Peter's. Together the 2 children and Scamper crept down the stairs. They were very warmly wrapped up indeed, but as soon as they got out into the air, they found that it was not nearly as cold as they expected. "The snow's melting. There's no frost tonight," whispered Janet. "Gosh, I hope those snowmen won't have melted," said Peter in alarm. "Oh, they won't yet," said Janet. "Come on, I can see one of the others." The passwords were whispered softly at the door of the shed, and soon there were 5 of the secret 7 there. Peter lighted a candle, and they all looked at one another in excitement. "We've got to paint our faces white and put on our white things," said Peter. "Then we're ready." Jack giggled. "Look at Scamper. He's in white too. Scamper, you look ridiculous." With squeals and gurgles of laughter, the 4 boys painted their faces white. Janet fitted the little white skull caps she'd roughly made over each boy's head. "Well, I shouldn't like to meet you walking down the lane tonight," she said. "You look terrifying." "Time we went," said Peter. "Goodbye, Janet. Go to bed now and sleep tight. I'll tell you our adventures in the morning. I shan't wake you when I come in." "I shall stay awake till you come," said Janet. She watched them go off down the moonlit path, a row of strange white figures with horrid white faces. They came to the lane where the old house stood and went down it. They soon came to the old house. It stood silent and dark, with its roof white in the moonlight. "Nobody's here yet," said Peter. "There's no light anywhere in the house, and not a sound to be heard." "Well, let's go and join the merry gang of snowmen then," said Jack. "And I wish you'd tell Scamper not to get between my feet so much, Peter. He'll trip me up in this sheet thing I'm wearing." They climbed over the gate and went into the field. The snowmen still stood there, but alas, they were melting, and were already smaller than they'd been in the morning. Scamper went and sniffed at each one solemnly. Peter called him. "Come here. You've got to stand as still as we do, and remember, not a bark, not a growl, not a whine." Scamper understood. He stood as still as a statue beside Peter. The boys looked for all the world like neat snowmen as they stood there in the snowy field. They waited and waited. Nobody came. They waited half an hour, and then they began to feel cold. "The snow's melting round my feet," complained Jack. "How much longer do you think we've got to stand here?" Peter was about to answer when he stopped and stiffened. He'd heard something. "What was it?" "Shh," said Peter. They all listened. A faraway sound came to their straining ears. "It's that squealing noise," said Jack suddenly. "I know it is, only very faint and far away. It's coming from the old house. There is somebody there." Shivers went down their backs. They listened again, and once more the queer, faraway sound came on the night air. "I don't like it," said Peter. "I'm going to the old house to see if I can hear it there. I think we ought to tell someone." "Oh, let's all go," said Colin, but Peter was quite firm about that. "No, 2 to go, and 2 of us to remain on guard. That's what we said. Jack, you come with me. Colin and George, stay here and watch." Peter and Jack, two odd white figures with strange white faces, went to the field gate, climbed it, and went to the gate of the old house. They opened it, and it shut behind them. There was no noise at all to be heard now. They went to the side door. It was fastened, of course. Then they went to the back door and tried that. That was locked too. Then they heard a queer, thudding, thundering noise from somewhere in the house. They clutched at one another. What was going on in this old empty house? "I say, the old man has left the window he spoke to us from this morning open a little," whispered Jack suddenly. "Goodness, has he really? Then what about getting in and seeing if we can find the prisoner?" whispered Peter in excitement. It only took a minute or two to climb up and get inside. They stood in the dark kitchen listening. There was no noise to be heard at all. Where could the prisoner be? "Dare we search the whole house from top to bottom?" said Peter. "I've got my torch." "Yes, we dare, because we jolly well ought to," answered Jack. So, as quietly as they could, they tiptoed into first the scullery and then an outhouse. Nobody was there at all. "Now let's go and look in the rooms leading off the hall," said Peter. They came to a shut door. Sounds came from behind it. Peter clutched Jack. "Somebody's in there. I expect the door's locked, but I'll try it. Stand ready to run if we're chased." The door wasn't locked. It opened quietly. The sounds became loud at once. Somebody was in there, snoring. The same thought came to both boys at once. It must be the caretaker. Quietly, Peter looked in. Moonlight filled the room. On a low, untidy bed lay the old caretaker, not even undressed. He looked dirty and shabby, and he was snoring as he slept. Peter turned to go, and his torch suddenly knocked against the door and fell with a crash to the floor. He stood petrified, but the old man didn't stir. Then Peter remembered how deaf he was. Thank goodness, he hadn't even heard the noise. He shut the door quietly, and the two boys stood out in the hall. Peter tried his torch to see if he'd broken it. No, it was all right. Good. "Now we'll go upstairs," he whispered. "You're not afraid, are you, Jack?" "Not very," said Jack. "Just a bit. Come on." They went up the stairs that creaked and cracked in a very tiresome manner, up to the first floor with 5 or 6 rooms to peep into, all empty as one another, then up to the top floor. But there was absolutely nothing there at all. The rooms were either dark and empty, or full of moonlight and nothing else. They stood there wondering what to do next, and once more that far-away, muffled squealing came on the night air, a kind of whinnying noise, followed by a series of curious thuds and crashes. "There is a prisoner here somewhere, and he's knocking for help and squealing too," said Peter, forgetting to whisper. "Someone downstairs. But we've looked everywhere." Jack was making for the stairs. "Come on, we must have missed a cupboard or something," he called. Down they went, not caring now about the noise they made. They came to the kitchen. The noises had stopped again. Then the thudding began once more. Jack clutched Peter. "I know where it's coming from. Under our feet. There's a cellar there. That's where the prisoner is." "Look for the cellar door, then," said Peter. They found it at last, in a dark corner of the passage between kitchen and scullery. They turned the handle, and what a surprise! The door opened. "It's not locked," whispered Jack. "Why doesn't the prisoner escape, then?" Stone steps led downwards into the darkness. Peter flashed his torch down them. He called in a rather shaky voice, "Who's there? Who is it down there?" There was no answer at all. The boys listened with straining ears. They could distinctly hear the sound of very heavy breathing, loud and harsh. "We can hear you breathing," called Jack. "Do tell us who you are. We've come to rescue you." Still no reply. This was dreadful. Both boys were really scared. They didn't dare go down the steps. Their legs simply refused to move downwards. yet it seemed very cowardly to go back into the passage again. And then another sound came to them, the sound of low voices somewhere. Then came the sound of a key being turned in a lock and a door being opened. Jack clutched Peter in a panic. "It's those men I heard last night. They're back again. Quick, we must hide before they find us here." The two boys, strange little figures in white, stood for a moment not knowing where to go. Then Peter stripped off his white sheet and cap. "Take yours off too," he whispered to Jack. "We shan't be so easily seen in our dark overcoats if we slip into the shadows somewhere." They threw their things into a corner and then slipped into the hall. They crouched there, hoping that the men would go straight down into the cellar. But they didn't. "Better see if that old caretaker's asleep," said a voice, and the two men came into the hall to open the caretaker's door. And then one of them caught sight of Peter's whitewashed face, which gleamed queerly from the middle of the dark shadows. Peter had forgotten his face was white. "Good gracious! Look over there, in that corner! Whatever is it?" cried one of the men. "Look over there, Mac!" A powerful torch was switched on, and the two boys were discovered at once. With a few strides, the man called Mac went over to them. He picked up both boys at once, gave them a rough shake, and set them on their feet. "Now then, what's the meaning of this, huh? Hiding here with your faces all painted up like that. What are you doing?" "Let go my arm! You're hurting," said Jack angrily. "The thing is, what are you up to?" "What do you mean?" said the man roughly. The thudding noise began again, and the two boys looked at the men. "That's what I mean," said Jack. "Who's down there? Who are you keeping prisoner?" Jack got a clout on the head that made him see stars. Then he and Peter were dragged to a nearby cupboard and locked in. The men seemed furiously angry for some reason or other. Peter put his ear to the crack and tried to hear what they were saying. "What are we going to do now? If those two kids get anyone here, we're done." "Right. Keep the kids here too, then. Put them down with Kerry Blue. We'll fetch him tomorrow night and clear off, and nobody'll know nothing. The job will be done by then." "Well, what about the kids?" "We'll leave them locked up here. And send a card to the old caretaker to tell him to look down in his cellar the day after tomorrow. He'll get a shock when he finds the kids prisoners there. Serve 'em right, little pests." Peter listened. Who was Kerry Blue? What a peculiar name. He trembled when he heard the men coming to the door, but they didn't unlock it. One of them called through the crack, "You can stay there for a while. Teach you to come poking your noses into what's no business of yours." Then began various curious noises. Something seemed to be brought into the scullery. The boys heard the crackling of wood as if a fire was being lighted. Then a nasty smell came drifting through the cracks of the door. "Oh, they're boiling something. Whatever is it?" said Peter. "Horrible smell." They couldn't think what it was. The cupboard, made to take a few coats, was small and cold and airless. The two boys were very uncomfortable. They were glad when one of the men unlocked the door and told them to come out. "Now you let us go," began Peter, and got a rough blow on his shoulder at once. "No cheek from you," said one of the men, and hustled the boys down to the cellar door. He thrust both of them through it, and they half fell down the top steps. The door shut behind them. They could hear it being locked. Blow, blow, blow. Now they were prisoners too. Peter switched on his torch, his hand trembling as he did so. What were they going to see? What they saw was so surprising that both boys gave a gasp of amazement. They were looking down on a beautiful horse, whose laid-back ears and rolling eyes showed that he was as scared as they were. "A horse," said Jack feebly. "It's a horse." Yes, that squealing was its frightened whinny, and thudding was its hooves on the stone floor when it rushed about in panic, said Peter. "Oh, Jack, poor, poor thing. How wicked to keep a horse down here like this. Why do they do it?" "Oh, it's such a beauty. It looks like a racehorse," said Jack. "Do you suppose they've stolen it?" Peter went down the steps, talking as he went. "So, you're Kerry Blue, are you? And a beautiful name it is, too, for a beautiful horse. Oh, don't be frightened, Beauty. I'm your friend. Hey, just let me stroke that velvety nose of yours. There, you'll be all right. There. The horse squealed and shied away. Peter took no notice. He went right up to the frightened creature and rubbed his hand fearlessly down its soft nose. The horse stood absolutely still. Then it suddenly nuzzled against the boy and made queer little snorting sounds. "Jack, come on. The horse is friendly now," called Peter. "Oh, he's such a beauty. What brutes those men are to keep a horse down in a dark cellar like this. It's enough to make it go mad." Jack came down the steps. He stroked the horse's back and then gave an exclamation. "Ah, it feels sticky and wet." Peter shone his torch on the horse's coat. It gleamed wetly. "Jack, those men have been dyeing him," cried Peter. "His coat's still wet with dye." "That horrid smell was the dye being boiled up ready to use," said Jack. "Poor old Kerry Blue. What have they been doing to you?" The horse had a mass of straw in one corner and a rough manger of hay in another. Oats were in a heavy pail. Water in another pail. "Well, if we want a bed, we'll have to use the straw," said Peter, "and have oats for feed." "Oh, we shan't need to," said Jack. "I bet old Colin and George will come and look for us soon. We'll shout the place down as soon as we hear them." They settled down on the straw to wait. Kerry Blue decided to lie down on the straw too. The boys leaned against his warm body, wishing he didn't smell so strongly of dye. When the music stops, please turn your cassette over. Up in the field, where the snow was now rapidly melting, Colin and George had been waiting impatiently for a long time. They'd seen Jack and Peter disappear over the gate and had had a difficult time holding Scamper back because he wanted to follow them. They'd stood there quietly for about half an hour, wondering whenever Peter and Jack were coming back, when Scamper began to growl. "He can hear something," said Colin. "Yes, a car coming down the lane. I do hope it's not those men again. Jack and Peter will be caught if so." The car had no trailer van behind it this time. It stopped at the gate of the old house, and the two men got out. Scamper suddenly barked loudly, and was at once cuffed by Colin. "Idiot!" hissed Colin. "Now you've given us away!" One of the men came to the field gate at once. He gazed at the 6 snowmen. "Come and look here," he called to the other man, who went to stand beside him. How Colin and George trembled and quaked. "What? Oh, we saw the snowman there last night, don't you remember?" he said. "Some kids have been messing about again today and built a few more. Hey, come on. That dog we heard barking must be a stray one about somewhere." The men left the gate and went up the drive to the house. Colin and George breathed freely again. That was a narrow escape. Thank goodness for their white faces, caps and sheets. Thank goodness Scamper was in white too. At last, just as they thought they really must go and scout round the house to see what was happening, they heard sounds again. Voices. Ah, the men were back again. There was the sound of a car door being shut quietly. The engine started up. The car moved down the lane to turn in at the field gate again, go round in a circle, and come out facing up the lane. It went by quickly, squelching in the soft, melting snow. "They've gone," said Colin. "And we were awful nuts not to have stolen up to the gate and taken the car's number. Now it's too late." "Yes, we could have done that," said George. What shall we do now? Wait to see if Peter and Jack come out again?" "Yes, but not for too long," said Colin. "My feet are really frozen." They waited for about 5 minutes, and still no Peter or Jack came. So, sloshing through the fast-melting snow, the two boys went to the gate. They climbed over. Soon they were in the drive of the old house, hurrying up to the front door, with Scamper at their heels. But of course they couldn't get in there, nor in the other doors either. And then, like Jack and Peter, they discovered the open window. In they went. They stood on the kitchen floor and listened. They could hear nothing at all. They called softly, "Jack! Peter! Are you there?" Nobody answered. Not a sound was to be heard in the house. And then Scamper gave a loud bark and ran into the passage between the scullery and the kitchen. He scraped madly at the door there. The boys followed at once, and no sooner had they got there than they heard Peter's voice. "Who's there? That you, Colin and George? Say the password if it's you." "Weekdays, where are you?" called George. "Down here in the cellar. We'll come up. We're all right. Can you unlock the door, or has the key been taken?" "No, it's here," said Colin. "Left in the door." He turned the key and unlocked the door. He pushed it open just as Jack and Peter came up to the top of the cellar steps. And behind them came somebody else. Somebody whose feet made a thudding sound on the stone steps. Kerry Blue. He wasn't going to be left behind in the dark cellar all alone. He was going to keep beside these nice, kind boys. Colin and George gaped in astonishment. They stared at Kerry Blue as if they'd never seen a horse in their lives before. A horse, down in the cellar, locked up with Peter and Jack. How extraordinary. "Have the men gone?" asked Peter, and Colin nodded. "Yes, away in their car. That's why we came to look for you. They saw us in the field because Scamper barked, but they thought we were just snowmen. I say, what happened here?" "Let's get out of this house," said Peter. "I just can't bear being here any longer." He led Kerry Blue behind him, and Colin was surprised that the horse made so little noise on the wooden floor of the kitchen. He looked down at the horse's hooves and gave an exclamation. "Look! What's he got on his feet?" "Felt slippers made to fit his great hooves," said Peter with a grin. "That explains the curious prints we saw in the snow. I guess he had those on so that he wouldn't make too much noise down in the cellar. My word, he was scared when we found him. Come on, I'm going home." 6 figures went up the snowy lane. 2 boys in dark anoraks, 2 in curious white garments and caps, a dog in a draggled white coat, and a proud and beautiful horse. All the boys had gleaming white faces and looked extremely odd, but they didn't meet anyone, and it didn't matter. Peter talked hard as he went, telling of all that had happened to him and Jack. Colin and George listened in astonishment, half jealous that they too had not shared in the whole of the night's adventure. "I'm going to put Kerry Blue into one of the stables at our farmhouse," said Peter. "He'll be all right now." "Ha! What a shock those men'll get when they find him gone. And tomorrow we'll tell the police. Meet at 9:30 and collect Pam and Barbara on the way, will you? This really has been a wonderful mystery, and I do think the Secret Seven has done well. Goodness, I'm tired. I shall be asleep in 2 shakes of a duck's tail." They were all in bed and asleep in under half an hour. Janet was fast asleep when Peter got in. He had carefully stabled Kerry Blue, who was now quite docile and friendly. In the morning, what an excitement! Peter told his father and mother what had happened, and his father, in amazement, went to examine Kerry Blue. "He's a very fine racehorse," he said, "and he's been dyed with some kind of brown stuff, as you can see. I expect those fellows meant to sell him and race him under another name. Well, you've stopped that, you and your society, Peter." "What about getting on to the police now?" said the children's mother anxiously. "It does seem to me they ought to be after those men at once." "There's a meeting of the Secret Seven down in the shed at 9:30, said Peter. "Perhaps the police could come to it." "Oh, no. I hardly think the police would want to sit on your flower pots and boxes," said Mother. "You must all meet in Daddy's study. That's the proper place." So, at 9:30, when the 7 were all waiting in great excitement, and Scamper was going quite mad, biting a corner of the rug, the bell rang, and in walked 2 big policemen. They looked most astonished to see so many children sitting around in a ring. "Good morning," said the inspector. What is all this about? You didn't say much on the phone, sir." "No, I wanted you to hear the story from the children," said Peter's father. He unfolded the morning paper and laid it out flat on the table. The children crowded round. On the front page was a big photograph of a lovely horse. Underneath it were a few sentences in big black letters. "Kerry Blue, stolen. Famous racehorse disappears. No sign of his hiding place." "I expect you saw that this morning," said Peter's father. "Peter, tell him where Kerry Blue is." "In our stables," said Peter, and thoroughly enjoyed the look of utter amazement that came over the faces of the 2 policemen. They got out notebooks. "Oh, this is important, sir," said the inspector to Peter's father. "Can you vouch for the fact that you've got the horse?" "Oh, yes, there's no doubt about it," said Peter's father. "You can see him whenever you like. Peter, tell your story." "We're going to take it in turns to tell bits," said Peter. He began. He told about how they'd made snowmen in the field. Then Jack went on to tell how he'd gone to look for his Secret 7 badge in the field and how he'd seen the car and its trailer van. "Of course, I know now it was a horse box," he said, "but I didn't know then. I couldn't think what it was. It looked like a small removal van or something. I couldn't see any proper windows either." So the story went on. How they'd interviewed the caretaker and what he'd said. How they'd tracked the car down to the field gate and up the lane again. Then how 4 boys dressed up as snowmen with Scamper had gone to watch. Then came the exciting bit about Peter and Jack creeping into the house to find the prisoner and being caught themselves. And then Colin and George took up the tale and told how they in their turn went into the house to find Jack and Peter. "Adventurous kids, aren't they?" said the inspector with a twinkle in his eye, turning to Peter's mother. "Very," she said. "But I don't at all approve of this night-wandering business, Inspector. They should have all have been in bed and asleep." "Quite," said the inspector. "I agree with you. They should have told the police, no doubt about that, and left them to solve the mystery. Wandering about at night dressed up as snowmen. I never heard anything like it." He spoke in such a severe voice that the 3 girls felt quite alarmed. And then he smiled, and they saw that actually he was very pleased with them. "I'll have to find out the name of the owner of the old house," he said, "and see if he knows anything about these goings-on." "It's a Mr. Hollycoff, 64 Haycombe Street, Covelty," said George at once. Pam and I found that out." "Good work," said the inspector, and the other policeman wrote the address down at once. "Very good work indeed." "I suppose they don't know the number of the car, do they?" asked the second policeman. "That would be a help." "No," said Colin regretfully. "But the other 2 girls here know something about the horse box, sir. They took the measurements of the tyres and even drew a copy of the pattern on them. It showed on the snow, you see." "Janet did that," said Barbara honestly, wishing she hadn't laughed at Janet for doing it. Janet produced the paper on which she'd drawn the pattern and taken the measurements. The inspector took it at once, looking very pleased. "Splendid. Couldn't be better. It's no good looking for tracks today, of course, because the snow's all melted. This is a very, very valuable bit of evidence. Dear me, what bright ideas you children have." Janet was scarlet with pleasure. Peter looked at her and smiled proudly. She was a fine sister to have, a really good member of the Secret 7. "Well, these children seem to have done most of our work for us," said the inspector, shutting his notebook. "They've got the address of the owner, and if he happens to have a horse box in his possession, whose tyres match these measurements and this pattern, then he'll have to answer some very awkward questions." The police went to see Kerry Blue. The children crowded into the stable too, and Kerry Blue put his ears back in alarm, but Peter soon soothed him.
"Yes, he's been partly dyed already," said the inspector, feeling his coat. "If he'd had one more coat of colour, he'd be completely disguised. I suppose those fellows meant to come along and do that tonight, and then take him off to some other stable. But of course they had to hide him somewhere safe while they changed the colour of his coat, and so they chose the cellars of the old empty house, belonging to Mr. J. Hollycoff. Well, 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 I wonder what he knows about it."
The children could hardly wait to hear the end of the adventure. They heard about it at the very next meeting of the Secret Seven, which was called not by the members themselves, but by Peter's father and mother. It was held in the shed, and the two grown-ups had the biggest boxes as seats. Janet and Peter sat on the floor. "Well," said Peter's father, "Mr. Hollycoff is the owner of the horse-box, and of the car as well. The police waited in the old house for the two men last night, and they came. They're now safely under lock and key. They were so surprised when they found Kerry Blue gone that they hardly made a struggle at all." "Who does Kerry Blue belong to, Daddy?" said Peter. "The papers said he was owned by Colonel James Healy. Is he sending someone to fetch him?"
"Yes," said his father. "He's sending off a horse-box for him today, and he's also sent something for the Secret Seven. Perhaps you'd like to see what it is, Peter." Peter took an envelope from his father and opened it. On the envelope was written, "For the Secret Seven Society, with my thanks and best wishes, J.H." Out fell a shower of tickets. Janet grabbed one. "Oh, a circus ticket! And a pantomime ticket, too! Are there 7 of each?" There were. 2 lovely treats for everyone, except Scamper. "Oh, but he can have a great, big, delumptious, scrumplicious bone, can't he, Mummy?" cried Janet, hugging him. "Whatever are you talking about? Is that some foreign language?" asked his mother in astonishment, and everyone laughed. "How really decent of him," said Peter. "We didn't want any reward at all. The adventure was enough reward. It was super." "Well, we'll leave you to talk about it," said his mother, getting up. "Or else we shall find that we belong to your society too, and that it's the Secret 9 instead of the Secret 7. "No, it's the Secret 7, said Peter firmly. "The best society in the world. Hurrah for the Secret 7.